5. And I hope that everyone can see and everyone can hear and nothing is breaking up. I know that weather in different places can have something to do with that, but I don't endeavor to be long today, all right? And tomorrow I'm going to do an evening edition of Daring Dialogues because I have some appointments I have to take care of during the day tomorrow. So tomorrow I will do an evening edition of Daring Dialogues, and we're going to look at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you can, please make plans for that. We'll be back covering relationship, dating, the history of dating. And as you all know, it was starting to get a little interesting. All right. So we definitely want to come back and finish that conversation, have that conversation. All right. So what was going on in history today? What was going on in history today? I have a book called Today in History by the History Channel, and every single day it gives you different things that were going on in history. And so on today, March the 13th, let's see what we have. Today in history, 1942, during World War II. Good morning, love. During World War II, German Nazis opened a second extermination camp at Belzec in Poland and gassed the first 6,000 deportees. So think about that. Today in history, people were being exterminated. Wow. Thank God for freedom. All right. Today in history, in 1961, in an attempt to patch up relations with Latin America, U.S. President John Kennedy proposes a multi-billion-dollar aid program called the Alliance for Progress. So, in 1961, we were actually trying to do better about our relationship with other countries. Go figure. 1975, on this same day, toward the end of the Vietnam War, North Vietnamese troops captured the strategic provincial capital of Ban My Thuot in central highlands of South Vietnam. So, war was also going on this same day. 1979, this same day, socialists in Grenada stage a bloodless coup and take control of the Caribbean nation. Lots of things dealing with war happened on this day. 1996, in the 13th century Scottish village of Dunblane, a former Boy Scout leader burst into a school gymnasium. Yikes! And there's a school shooting that happens on this day. Wow. So, March 13th is kind of an infamous day. People who were born on this day. Let's see if you all may know any of these people. Here's one. I just talked about him. 1911, L. Ron Hubbard. Born on this day, American founder of Scientology and author of Scientology Dianetics, Clear Body, Clear Mind. Also born on this day, a gentleman by the name of Brian Saxton. He was an American professional football player. So those are some of the things that happened on this day. And I believe there's also a website where you can actually look up, if you're a person that's interested in history like this, you can actually look it up and it'll say this day in history, and you can type in the day and it'll actually give you things that happen, famous people born on this day, etc. All right. So let me go ahead and do my giveaways. I want to get that out of the way. And then I want to go into our reading on immigration. We're only doing immigration today. for our Teachable Tuesday, history. And here's the instructions for the giveaway. All right. I know I have another email inside of my bio. That's our ministry email. But this is the email you need to email your answer to. And again, the first person to respond correctly gets the giveaway. All right. So here's the email. Email your answers. Make sure you tell me if it's question number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. All right. And you can even put your answer inside of the title. Okay. You don't even have to go into your email. Just put it in the title. Question number 1. Put the answer in the title and hit send. All right. I want to make it as easy as possible. So again, the first person to answer correctly gets the gift. Got it? Good. All right. So I know people are going to drop off while they're trying to go answer questions, and that's fine. All right. Question number 1. Question number 1. I'm going to describe what it is, and we've actually talked about all 4 of these during these broadcasts. So if you've been paying attention, you should know the answers. Question number 1. A cultural, social, and artistic explosion, also known as a new Negro movement. It grew out of changes that had taken place in the African community since slavery. It was a period of time when African Americans were encouraged to celebrate their heritage, racial pride, creative expression, and intellectualism. Significant figures of this time included Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Claude McKay, Zora Neale Hurston, Bessie Smith, Paul Robeson, and Langston Hughes. That is question number 1. What was this time period called? All right. And the giveaway for that is a movie. All right. Giveaway for that is a movie by Nicholas Sparks. So that's question number 1. All right. Question number 2. Giveaway is some hand-picked stationery, a mini journal. She believed she could, so she did. And a lovely bookmark picked out for you. All right, here we go. Question number 2. African American born Afrocentrist, psychiatrist, and author. She believed people of color needed to liberate themselves psychologically from white domination. In 1974, she authored a series of papers called The Isis Papers, Keys to the Colors. She wrote about melanin theory, a claim that white people were descendants of albinos. Who is this person? Who is this person? That's question number 2. Question number 2. All right. Question number 3. We only have 4 questions this time around. Question number 3. The gift is gold leggings and some lovely lipstick. For those of you who like a night out on the town. The size of the gold leggings is a medium large. Of course, they are stretch material. All right. Question number 3. Voting rights activist, civil rights leader, and philanthropist. She worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She helped poor and needy families in her Mississippi community. She was vice chair of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. She was elected as a National Democratic Party delegate in 1972. She died on March 14th, which is actually tomorrow, 1977. And according to the New York Times, none of us would be where we are today had she not been here then. Again, she was a voting rights activist, civil rights leader, and philanthropist. She worked for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She helped poor and needy families in her Mississippi community. She was vice chair of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And she was elected as a National Democratic Party delegate in 1972. Who is she? It's Women's History Month, so thought I'd do 2 women today. So that's for number 3. All right. And number 4, another Nicholas Spark film giveaway. Question number 4. Again, this is an event. Successful anti-slavery and anti-colonial insurrection that overthrew the French. Led to the West pulling out of the institution of slavery throughout the Americas. The only slave uprising that led to the founding of a state free from slavery and ruled by non-whites and former captives. Self-liberated slaves destroyed slavery, fought to preserve their freedom with the collaboration of mulattoes, and they founded this sovereign state. They challenged long-held beliefs about black inferiority and enslaved persons' capacity to achieve and maintain freedom. Most people call it the most successful insurrection in the Western Hemisphere against slavery. What is this event? All right. So that was number 4. All right. I hope you got your answers in. Remember, email me at reachshante@gmail.com with the correct answer. All right. I don't know why Periscope is still freezing day after day, but I'm really hoping it gets resolved. I may have to contact Periscope people again. All right. Let's get into our book on immigration. This Land is Our Land, A History of American Immigration. Recently, in January, I think they laid out the most restrictive, I was reading an article where they said they laid out the most restrictive immigration plan since the 1920s. Isn't that something? All right. All right. So we began to talk last time about the nativists and them fearing job competition, right? So many Americans believe that the way to keep America for Americans wasn't to Americanize immigrants, but to keep them out all together. All right. This is the picture I'm going to show you is photographed in Boston at a school called Hancock School in Boston. The attending school helped children to learn the English language as well as the quote-unquote American ways. I'm just wondering what those American ways were. Because at the time, America was still in many ways dehumanizing part of its population. So I'm wondering, what were they actually teaching as the American way in these schools? In 1921, there were enough votes in Congress to pass the first Immigrant Act setting quotas. Quotas were an upper limit on the number of people who could come from each country each year. All right? It was called the Emergency Immigration Act because Americans were so worried about new immigrants flooding the country that they wanted to do something immediately to stop the flow. Congress set the total number of immigrants from all countries at 355,000 per year. Almost 9.9 million European immigrants had come between 1905 and 1914, most from Southern and Eastern Europe. Government officials counted the number of foreign-born people from each country who lived in the United States according to the 1910 census. They said that 3% of that number could come from each country each year. So it was already a false balance. Because if you're only starting from that point of when people were coming in, all right, and more people from different countries were coming in than others, so if you set it at 3% of each one, that's kind of a faulty scale, all right? Although the number of immigrants dropped significantly in 1921, nativists still thought the quotas for Eastern and Southern Europeans were too high. They feared that jobs would be taken away from Americans, that communists, labor agitators, and other radicals would enter the United States, and most important, that too many immigrants could not be assimilated, right? Because there's this notion that in order to be a good citizen of America, you have to assimilate into American values. Well, here's the thing. One of those parts of assimilation based on the original grafting into the American way was to be white. So how do you assimilate into being white if your skin color means you can never do that part? I'm trying to figure this one out, okay? So they wanted people who could be easily assimilated into, quote unquote, the American way. The old Americans are getting a little panicky, and no wonder. America, Americans, Americanism are being crowded out of America, wrote one reader to the New Republic in 1924. Albert Johnson, a congressman from Washington State, headed the House of Representatives Committee on Immigration. He led the fight for tougher quotas. He said, "Today, instead of a well-knit, homogeneous citizenry, we have a body politic made up of all and every diverse element. Today, instead of a nation descended from generations of freemen, bred to a knowledge of the principles and practice of self-government, of liberty under law, we have a heterogeneous population, no small proportion of which is sprung from races that throughout the centuries have known no liberty at all. In other words, our capacity to maintain our cherished institutions stand diluted by a stream of alien blood, with all its inherited misconceptions respecting the relationships of the governing power to the governed. It is no wonder, therefore, that the myth of the melting pot has been discredited. The United States is our land. We intend to maintain it so. The day of unalloyed welcome to all peoples, the day of indiscriminate acceptance of all races, has definitely ended. My goodness, it sounds like a campaign speech of 2018. All right? This was the attitude And this was not the attitude against black people. Okay? This was the attitude against people who looked like them that were not considered white enough. Hello? So if this was the attitude against people who looked like them, that they had alien blood, all right? What do you think the attitude was when they encountered back then the person who would have been called a Negro? All right? Congress passed the Johnson-Reed Act in 1924. Instead of using the 1910 census to decide America's foreign population, it used the census, it went all the way back and used the census of 1890. This was because in 1890, there had been more Northern and Western European immigrants and fewer Southern and Eastern European immigrants living in the United States than in 1910. So when people talk about laws, when people talk about shaping laws, we have to look at how did they shape these laws. They were shaping these laws to favor certain populations and to disfavor other populations, even within those that are now all condensed into the term white. Okay? Or white non-Hispanic origin. Congress wanted the United States to return to its English roots, which meant having immigrants from Britain or Western and Northern Europeans be recorded as the largest group in the population. The law set the quota at only 2% instead of 3% from each country living here in 1890. The total number of immigrants would be only 150,000 a year. New immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe would make up only 15% of the total each year. It took 5 years before the details of all the quotas were worked out. After July 1st, 1929, the yearly quotas for Northern and Western European countries included these. All right? So, Northern and Western European countries, and they have some graphs and some charts set up here that I'm going to read for you. Great Britain and Northern Ireland were allowing 65,721 to come in each year. All right? The Irish Free State, now Ireland, was allowed 17,853 to come in. Sweden was allowed about a little over 3,000. The Netherlands was allowed a little over 3,000. France was allowed a little over 3,000. Norway was allowed 2,377. Poland was allowed, this is the Eastern and Southern European countries. Poland was allowed 6,524. Italy, 5,802. Czechoslovakia, 2,874. Russia, 2,784. And Hungary, 869. So you can see kind of the drastic drop of those who were of Polish, Italian, Czechoslovakian, Russian, and Hungarian descent. They didn't want too many of them over here in the United States. All right? So if this is their attitude and their mindset about each other, it shouldn't shock us that their attitude and mindset about a group of people who had been freed from slavery, that they were trying to find a need for, because once I have freed you and I can't work you like a mule for free anymore, then you become, quote unquote, the Negro problem. All right. After 1870, millions of immigrants had arrived from these countries. After 1929, only 869 Hungarians and 5,802 Italians could immigrate each year. Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the country known as the United Kingdom, was allowed almost 66,000 per year. But English, Irish, Welsh, and Scottish immigrants never reached this number. So a great deal of our American population, okay, originates from Great Britain and Northern Ireland. I just recently found out that I have some ancestry from Great Britain and Ireland. Irish Welsh. So, with the 1924 Immigration Act, racial assumptions became law. Americans believed that they were preventing their country from being overtaken by inferior groups of human beings who could never change. This is what they believed. Country quotas were not eliminated until 1965, but now we're probably going to go into another round of country quotas or something similar to it. The document that I was looking at last night was actually talking about how people are let into the country, whether you are the spouse of a United States citizen, whether you are a child of a United States citizen, like a grown child that lives in another country. There were different breakdowns of how you could come into the country, and some of those programs are about to be eliminated. So, but the 1924 Act was focused mainly on Europeans. Asians, who came even lower on the Anglo-Saxon scale of desirability, had more prejudiced and restrictive policies aimed at them. Starting in the late 19th century, the United States passed laws that would not only limit their entry, but also never allow them to become American citizens. And so it's always interesting to see immigrants from Asia try to blend into or assimilate into this whiteness when they looked at them as even less desirable than anybody coming from Europe. So, from the other side, the other shore, immigrants from Asia. Immigrants from Asia. All right? That's where we're going to now. I happened to see a Western movie called Rodeo at the Golden Horse Theater in Okayama City, said Frank Tamori, who was born in 1907 in Japan. And I was completely obsessed with American fever as a result of watching cowboys dealing with tens of thousands of horses in the vast western plains. Enormous content, rich land. One could see 1,000 miles at a glance. Respect for freedom and equality. That must be my permanent home, I decided. Tamori eventually immigrated to the United States. He ran a laundry in Portland, Oregon. Frank Tamori described a vision of the United States held by people from all over the world. I just recently had a discussion with someone about this vision of the United States. It's still in the minds of many. All right. Immigrants from Asia were among them. Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Indian, and other Asian peoples came to America for economic opportunity and personal freedom. Asians, like Europeans, often left their home countries because of extreme poverty. There were 4 in our family, my mother, my father, my sister, and me, explained a Chinese immigrant in the 19th century. We lived in a 2-room house. Our sleeping room and the other served as parlor, kitchen, and dining room. We were not rich enough to keep pigs or birds. Otherwise, our small house would have been more than overcrowded. How can we live on 6 baskets of rice, which were paid twice a year for my father's duty as a night watchman? Sometimes the peasants have a poor crop. Then we go hungry. Sometimes we went hungry for days. My mother and me would go over the harvested rice fields of the peasants to pick the grains that they dropped. We had only salt and water to eat with the rice. The first large Asian group that came to the United States was Chinese. These men, the vast majority of Chinese immigrants were men, came as early as 1849. They were drawn by the California Gold Rush. Between 1849 and 1930, some 380,000 Chinese immigrated to the United States. The majority of those who came to mine gold and those who arrived later to build railroads, work on farms, and open shops lived in California. After the Civil War, the Central Pacific Railroad began building track in California to join the Union Pacific Railroad, linking the eastern and western United States. Although Irish immigrants and workers worked on the railroad, Chinese workers were especially important in the West. The railroad owners believed that Chinese men worked harder and were more dependable than other immigrants and Americans, and they worked for less pay. At one point, Chinese made up at least 80% of the Central Pacific Railroad workers. Most of them intended to return to China after earning enough money, but many remained in the United States. Although the owners of mines, railroads, and farms considered Chinese people excellent workers, white workers saw them as a threat to their jobs. 2018, boy. White politicians objected to their presence. The majority of Chinese people lived in California, and California tried harder than any other state to limit Chinese immigration. The concentration within our state limits of vast numbers of Asiatic races and of the inhabitants of the Pacific Islands and many others dissimilar from ourselves in custom, language, and education threatens American mining, reported the California Assembly as early as 1852. This was only 3 years after Chinese people had begun to arrive in significant numbers. Racial alarm grew worse in California. Certain it is that the greater the diversity of colors and qualities of men, the greater will be the strife and conflict of feeling, wrote Helton Helper in The Land of the Gold, published in 1855. The same year, the California legislature passed an act to discourage the immigration to this state of persons who cannot become citizens thereof. That was the name of the act. It taxed ship owners $50 for every person landed who was not eligible to become a citizen of the United States. The question of citizenship went back to 1790 when Congress passed a naturalization law. Naturalization is the process by which a citizen of one country becomes a citizen of another. It applies only to immigrants. The law stated that any alien foreigner, being a free white person who shall have resided within the limits and jurisdiction of the United States for 2 years, may be admitted to become a citizen thereof. In 1798, Congress changed the law so that immigrants had to live here for 5 years instead of 2. But it did not change the phrase free white person. And so you have a nice little racist loophole, okay, for them to use. In 1870, Congress passed a naturalization law that allowed aliens of African nativity and persons of African descent to become citizens. Africans and African Americans were added to ensure that no previous law could stand in the way of their having the rights of citizens granted to them by the 14th Amendment, 1868, to the Constitution. The 14th Amendment and the 1866 Civil Rights Act before that was the first national law to say that anyone born in the United States, whether or not their parents were citizens, is an American citizen. The laws of 1790 and 1870 did not say that. People from Asia could not be citizens. It did not mention them at all. But because they were not mentioned, the United States government did not allow Chinese and other Asians to go through the process of becoming citizens. When a few Asians tried to become American citizens in the early 1900s, the Supreme Court said they could not, arguing that only white and black people were covered by the law. Did you hear that? Yeah. It wasn't until the 1940s that Asians from some countries were allowed to become citizens. Finally, in 1952, an immigration and naturalization law removed the barriers to all Asians gaining American citizenship. So, that's really recent, people. That's less than 100 years. 1952, those barriers finally get erased. All right? In 1869, work on the first railroads that joined the eastern and western United States ended. More than 10,000 Chinese railroad laborers were out of work and looking for other jobs. White Americans panicked. The 60,000 or 100,000 Mongolians, or Chinese, on our western coast are the thin edge of the wedge, which had its base of the 500 million of Eastern Asia, wrote economist Henry George in the New York Tribune in May 1869. He predicted that millions of Chinese would come here and take over the country. The Chinaman can live where stronger than he would starve. Give him fair play, and this quality enables him to drive out stronger races. Now, think about that twisted logic. If you are a stronger race, how can anybody drive you out? George's article is full of prejudice, incorrect assumptions, and exaggerations. It portrays Chinese men as weaker than white Americans, then argues that they can live on practically nothing. Chinese immigrants came together to protest against such prejudice and discrimination. Many of them were successful businessmen in California and intended to stay there. Around 1878, 1,300 Chinese, including the leaders of the Chinese merchants of San Francisco and California, petitioned the state about a law that did not provide schools for their children. These men paid American taxes, but did not have a school for their children. I want to show you an image from 1886 that's probably going to ring very, very, very familiar with what's happening right now, considering people's attitudes about the Second Amendment and immigration. As the number of Chinese immigrants increased, so did opposition to them. In 1886, this cover of an American magazine shows a man representing the state of Oregon shooting at and killing Chinese men who wanted to come there. All right? So, again, this is American history, okay? I need you to understand that. What has changed? What has changed? Nothing. Some people's minds, from generation to generation, has not changed. The bottom picture says, despite discrimination and violence, the Chinese population grew. In this photo, children of Chinese high class walk in San Francisco. Chinese merchants and businessmen petitioned the state of California to provide education for their children so that they could learn the English language. Look at this. All right. So early Chinese, the early Chinese who came over, were very proud of their heritage and had no compunction, all right, of showing off their particular garb that was an honor to their people. I don't think I have seen anybody from China wearing this in the United States. I don't think I've ever seen it. But that's actually really, really cool that they actually did that. All right. But of course, we know it probably made them a target. Right? Because their clothing was not yet assimilated. These merchants wrote, "We respectfully represent that these sections of the law very clearly exclude our children from the benefits of the public schools. We humbly approach you, begging you to change these laws so that our children may be admitted to the public schools, or what we would prefer, that separate schools may be established for them. We simply ask that our children may be placed upon the same footing as the children of other foreigners, so that they may learn the English language, which would be for the advantage of all." So, for those of you of Asian descent who maybe don't understand your civil rights that were fought for by the merchants in 1878, who were demanding that the Asian children be put on equal footing so that they could have proper schooling, so that they could learn the English language and have some upward mobility through that language. Yeah, they actually had to petition too. All right. So I want to stop right there for today. And I hope that you will think about this attitude that has seemingly, someone said that it has crept up on us, or that it has resurrected itself. I would go so far as to say it never died. It never died. These same attitudes have clearly been passed behind closed doors from generation to generation to generation. And now what we're seeing is people now feel okay to come back out into the public with the same attitudes that they never got rid of. Maybe they were told, it's not proper to say these things in public. But clearly, that restriction has been taken off. And now we have some of these same mindsets, same behaviors happening right now in the public. As we close, I want to definitely say, let's please lift up the families in Austin, Texas, who are experiencing domestic terrorism that many of the mainstream media refuses to call what it is, domestic terrorism, where boxes that have explosives have been placed on people's front porches. From my understanding, 2 people, possibly 3, are already dead. And I think there's 1 or 2 people injured. All right. This is happening at their home. This is not them going out into the public square and something happened. This is people who are delivering terrorism to people's front door like they're the UPS or FedEx. This is insane that would be happening in 2018, and that people would be so nonchalant about it occurring. So let's please keep the people in Austin in your prayers. Also, I would just say encourage all people of color at this point to be careful of your surroundings. Pay attention to your surroundings. If something is delivered to your door and you don't have any mail packages coming, it doesn't look properly wrapped or properly addressed, don't touch it. Don't bring it into your house. Matter of fact, call your law enforcement and let them know that you have a suspicious package at your door. All right. So be safe out here. We're living in perilous times, and we have some citizens of the United States who think because it's not happening to their family, they don't need to care about it. But I beg to differ. All right. This has been another Daring Dialogues. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Remember, we will be back here on tomorrow evening, 8 p.m. All right. We'll be back 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow, and we will be talking relationships. We'll be talking the history of dating, and we'll be talking kingdom marriage. That's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I will not be on in the morning tomorrow. All right. Thank you so very much for your time and attention. Remember, email me at reachshantae@gmail.com if you have the answers for the giveaways. All right. Take care, everyone, and God bless. All right. And I do not know what is happening with Periscope and why it's buffering so much and making it difficult for people to hear. But hopefully you were able to hear just fine over here on the YouTube live stream. All right. Thank you again for your time and attention. Take care. And remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today and be light.